Welcome to the Beyond 3D podcast, where we explore all things 3D and the important role that 3D data plays throughout the manufacturing process, driving decisions throughout a product's lifecycle. Here, we talk with industry analysts, business owners, developers, and industry influencers, and hear real stories that you can relate to and learn from, and know which trends and technologies apply to your business. So join us as we go beyond 3D. Welcome, everybody, to the Beyond 3D podcast. This is our very first episode, and we're really excited. I want to just go ahead and jump in and introduce our guests here today. We have Dave Opsahl, who is Vice President of Corporate Development for TechSoft 3D. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
And we have Tyler Barnes, who is Vice President of Marketing at TechSoft 3D. Hello, Tyler.
Hello.
And we also have TJ McCue, who is a writer for Forbes and other publications, and also spent 8 months on the road with the 3D RV, visiting people, talking about all things 3D. So thank you, TJ, for joining us here today.
Hi, good to be here.
And so with this podcast, we want to talk about kind of all things 3D, right? Everything from the technology and some trends to process and business decisions or business issues, and 3D PDF is something that we're going to be talking about. Different trends in software development is something we're going to be talking about. And so this first episode is really just for us here to explore what are some of the most pertinent things out there that we think that our listeners will be interested in and that we'll be talking about. And it's just kind of like an intro episode. So to get started, why don't we share a bit about ourselves with our audience? Just take a minute or so to tell our listeners a bit about your background and your current role. So Dave, why don't you go first?
Well, I've been involved with 3D software for longer than I care to admit, actually. I started working with it at Boeing many years ago. I've since moved over and worked on the supplier side, software developers in a variety of different spaces like product lifecycle management or supply chain management, and visualization software is another thing I've been involved in. And today I'm working for TechSoft 3D, and we are a toolkit manufacturer. We sell component software to people who develop applications around 3D.
Okay. And Tyler?
Sure. I haven't been in the industry quite as long as Dave, but prior to TechSoft, I was at Autodesk for over a decade. Spent about half that time working in product management. Took about 7 different Autodesk applications to market there. My last role was managing the Autodesk Inventor family of products. I managed the product management team there for Inventor, for Product Design Suite, and for all of the kind of family of Inventor products. Also spent quite a bit of time in marketing at Autodesk. So I worked on product marketing for Inventor for quite a long time, took some of the early products that you know now to market in their first iterations on the Autodesk labs, like Fusion 360, like Inventor Fusion. Prior to Autodesk, I worked in high-tech marketing for a number of different marketing agencies. And I'm now the VP of marketing here at TechSoft, so I'm responsible for kind of managing the TechSoft brand, overseeing content creation, communication strategy, product marketing. I do a lot on the inbound side as well, so market intelligence, informing product strategy, sales strategy, those types of things.
Excellent. And TJ?
All right. Well, I've been doing marketing and research work for technology companies for the last 25 years, and have done work with the Autodesks of the world and Lenovo and HP, and as you mentioned, spent the better part of a year traveling around doing research and writing about all the people doing things with 3D scanning, 3D printing, 3D software. And I currently write for Forbes in addition to the clients that I work on marketing projects for.
Excellent. And I forgot to say my name. So I'm Angela Simoes. I do PR and communications for TechSoft 3D. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. In your conversations with customers, partners, even prospective companies, people that you want to be working with, what are some of the common themes that you find come up in those conversations, whether they be technology related or business related? Dave, what are some of those themes that kind of keep popping up?
Well, I think on the independent software vendor side, or ISVs, is typically what we call people who develop those applications. The complexity of the data that they're dealing with is, paramount, I think, in most of their minds, finding a way to deal with, all the different directions the data is coming from. TJ mentioned 3D scanning and how that's being used to, create 3D models of things that before, I think, if they weren't designed that way to begin with, they'd be extraordinarily difficult to try to replicate in 3D. And so, there's just a constant theme of that, how to absorb all that, how to make it relevant. There's always that problem of you've got 3D data out there, but what are you going to use it for? So we're also seeing a lot of attention, being given to applications that aren't 3D in nature, but could be enabled by 3D for ease of navigation or drawing relationships between information that previously it would have been really hard to find a way to make, say, something like an ERP or enterprise resource planning application enabled with 3D so that you could navigate it with 3D rather than trying to figure out from text exactly what it is you're looking at. So things like that is something we see quite a bit of.
And we talk a lot about 3D data, and it's been talked about in the industry for a long time, but is everybody using 3D data already, or are there still some people that are making that transition and trying to figure it out?
Oh, I think there's still a lot of people that are trying to figure that out. There was a company that we were talking to just earlier this week that is over $1 billion a year. Billion euros a year in revenue, and they are still managing what amounts to a lot of their product management systems with Excel spreadsheets. You see that over and over again. Yeah.
And what do you think is some of the barrier to making that transition? Is it just kind of what you were saying, trying to figure out how do you take that first step and adopt? Or
well, what I've seen is that the workforce or the people that have to deal with this data by and large are younger than many of us that have been in the industry for a long time, and they don't have a lot of tolerance for things that are not very easy and very intuitive to use. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is another part of the complexity side of things, is the people developing the software are trying to figure out how to satisfy the needs of those users to make something that is extremely intuitive to use, where training really is not something that's an issue. In design applications, that's not going to be something you can do that quickly. But when it comes to an experience of, say, navigating information in a document or on a web page, if it's not brain dead simple, it's going to be really tough to see it adopted on a wide basis.
Right.
I think
I
think to add to that is that there's this expectation now, right, that you can get a simple, focused app to do the task you're trying to do. And so for the person, as Dave is talking about, you have someone who can go download various pieces to get a job done, various pieces of software. And their expectation is, if there's an engineer in a firm who's using, pick any one of the big CAD players, and that person wants to see that document, they're not going to go spend thousands of dollars to get that seat license.
Yeah.
They're going to want to view it, right? And that's where, obviously, from my experience of traveling around and spending, 5+ years specifically looking at 3D tech and writing about it and researching it, is people just want that user experience to be quick and painless and very focused. So they'll download, or they'll just use the 3D capability of a PDF viewer because they have absolutely no need of a full-fledged CAD package. So I think there's some of that, and if the data is embedded in that, so much the better, right? If it's not just, okay, I'm spinning an empty model, that's interesting, but it's really cool when I can dig down in and say, oh, it's this dimension, or it's this part number, or it's this spec, and that helps me to get work done from whatever tool I'm working in.
Yeah, it's interesting you'd say that, TJ, because we refer to that, and Tyler will identify with us, we refer to that as 3D on a page, where you just simply, have something that might be interactive, but in the context of somebody's workflow. They want the ability to have that be related to the information, the rest of the information they need to be able to do their job. And, if that's not connected, if that's not related, and it's not a very clean, intuitive user experience, they're not going to do that. They're not going to adopt that. And I completely agree on the app like thing. They want something that mimics the experience they have using a mobile device every day. Yeah, it's not a desktop application anymore in most cases.
And I wanted to go back to you, TJ, with that original question too. It sounds like you already contributed some of that, but what are some of the common themes that you are seeing as you talk to different companies and work with different companies when it comes to 3D data and working with 3D?
I think the biggest one is one that we're already alluding to, is that people don't realize that these tools are available. And to Dave's point, that they oftentimes are integrated. You don't even know that you can do that same thing on a desktop that you can do on a mobile device. But I think the biggest thing, and it's been over and over again, it's like you see 3D. I think most people, even people that are working beside it, see it as, it's a movie, right? It's a 3D experience that you're in some visual element. It's virtual reality or augmented reality, but there's so many things that we have that there's 3D data already for it, right? I mean, you're sitting outside a building. The guy who designed that building, or the gal who designed that building, has probably got all of the data points in a big file that, you could take apart that wall and see all the pieces of it. So it's mostly awareness, I think, that there are very user-friendly tools to help you get a job done that would make your life easier if you just looked around a little bit and grabbed hold of that tool.
Yeah, I do remember that from the 3D RV tour, that it was amazing, despite the amount of tens of thousands, even, dare I say, millions of dollars that are spent trying to make people aware of even free tools that are available. People still just don't know what's available to them or what's capable. It's like you say 3D and there's just this impression that, oh, that's just going to be that's too difficult. That's out of my realm. So clearly there's an education and awareness problem we're always chipping away at, right? Tyler, what's your take on some of this? Are you seeing some of the same things? Anything different that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that awareness. A really great example of that is something that we see all the time as the company that develops the 3D PDF technology. Is almost no one is aware that Acrobat Reader, which is installed on almost every person's desktop in the world, can view 3D. It can do measurements and markups and sectioning, and almost everyone has this jaw-dropping moment of, what? I didn't have any idea that I could do this. I don't need something else to view this special 3D PDF file. And it's no, in fact, everybody has the ability to do it. And it's just the awareness of it. I think that in terms of adoption, it depends on where in the world you're talking about. If you're talking about design creation, 3D is very much across the chasm and is mainstream. Back when I was working with an inventor, I'd say 80-90% of the manufacturers were using 3D for engineering, and the reason being is that there's such a big competitive disadvantage to not using 3D, just in terms of having an exact replica, digital replica of your product and being able to do things with it, like run stress simulations or how is this thing going to react if I dropped it, and that type of thing. There's such a disadvantage to not using it. Now, if you go further downstream, Dave was referring a partner he was talking to last week, and some of the spreadsheets that they were using, and that's very typical. So, the further you get away from an engineering department, the more companies struggle with getting that 3D data into people's hands. And I think that's kind of the big challenge is 3D is absolutely, there's so much information included in the 3D data, and there are people that are outside of engineering, procurement, suppliers, customers. There's all of these people in the chain that really could benefit from access to the data, and that's kind of the challenge, is how do you get that 3D data into people's hands so they can make good decisions based on what's happening in engineering.
So it's interesting. You mentioned, sorry, I didn't know if that was Dave or TJ, just a quick question. You mentioned that I think you said about 80 to 90% of manufacturers are already using 3D data at the engineering level. What percentage of that 80, 90% are using 3D data for that group you were just talking about that don't typically get access to the 3D data or contribute?
It really depends on the maturity of the organization. Some companies are very advanced because they see real business benefits in tying people together through the data. So whether that's using PLM or PDM, giving people a view to what's happening in engineering and allowing them to use that data. Smaller companies or more kind of conservative companies may not be as far along in that process. So I think it's you see pretty different things depending on the organization. Dave, if you have a thought on that.
Well, there's a metric that gets used, but I can't actually cite the source of it. I think it's just sort of a generally accepted idea that for every person in engineering, you've got somewhere between 25 and 50 people outside of engineering, somehow involved in the life cycle of that product, whether as a user of it, as somebody who's maintaining it, somebody who's doing something. And every one of those people has no access generally to a CAD system, or certainly not to the CAD system that was actually used to design whatever it is that's being built or constructed. And so if you think about, just a lot of the activity that goes around, a product, think of an automobile or an aircraft and the maintenance of that, the operation of it, the training of people to actually use that complex product. There's value in being able to use 3D as a way to make those tasks easier and more proficient. And I think that speaks to how broadly the data could be used if people just had an easy way to consume it, to get their hands on it, which is kind of where we really see a lot of activity around 3D PDF, because it does have that capability. You can create those relationships with the data. It's a tool that everybody's familiar with, very easy to use. It's available in a variety of different form factors. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about are something that technology actually delivers for people.
I'll ride along on and Tyler and Dave's thoughts with, I was at a NASA facility where, very specific to what you guys are talking about, they had the building model, but they had over many, many years done retrofits and remodels and changes, and they would send a maintenance crew out to fix something in the field. And the field for them was often under these buildings. And they had, various sensors or, fire extinguisher things or meters of different types. And they literally would have, let's say they sent an electrician, he might spend 8 hours looking for that item. So these guys 3D laser scanned the entire subterranean, basement type structures. And they wound up saving something in the order of $1.4 million a year in maintenance costs just from sending out a $100 an hour electrician and letting him burn a day trying to find the specific thing he was supposed to fix, because there were so many and it would take them so long to locate them. But then they added that data into the building model, so when they pulled it up to do maintenance, they were able to go right to it.
And how did they add that 3D data? Was it something that they designed, or they laser scan it, or because obviously that building's been there for a while, right? And I can imagine that they've had 3D data the whole way or the whole time.
Right. I think from the laser scans, and my memory is a little bit rusty here on this, but the laser scans gave them the physical object location, from an eyeballing it perspective, and then they probably had to go in and manually identify or pull codes off of those items and potentially manually enter it. But I'm not sure about that, because they made it sound like it didn't take that long.
But that's a great example, because I think a lot of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it could be that, let's say there is an existing structure or an existing machine or ship or whatever it is, that the plans are currently in 2D, but someone says, hey, we need a 3D model of this. And the idea of, oh my gosh, creating a 3D model of this huge behemoth thing, that's going to take forever. But again, it's an awareness thing of, well, if you had a laser scanner, you could do that fairly quickly versus having to do it all by hand, right? And again, awareness, education, maybe people think laser scanning is going to take is going to be really expensive, that sort of thing. And that's not the case anymore, right? You can do laser scanning. It's fairly affordable nowadays and really efficient. So again, back to the awareness and education element of things. Am I off my rocker on that one?
No, I think you're spot on. I think that's part of what it is that we see some of our partners developing software struggle with is that because it is so affordable, because you can actually use it in a lot of different places. There's just this incredible deluge of data. In the case of scanning, like TJ was talking about, point data, point cloud data that you can get in, and you can use that in a lot of different ways to reconstruct something that maybe wasn't designed originally with the aid of a computer aided design application. You can go in and you can use it in a maintenance role. We see this particularly with things that have long life cycles. So if I've got something that was designed 50 years ago, think of aircraft are always a good example. If I have a part for which all I have are a set of 2D drawings, we actually know of cases where suppliers will no longer accept 2D drawings as a way to bid on something that they are being asked to manufacture. They insist on having a 3D model. Well, today you can laser scan that entire model and go through and create something that you can then use to automate the actual creation of that, whether through 3D printing or through subtractive manufacturing or whatever technology you want to use. So no, you're right on, Angela.
Okay, good. Just making sure I'm not crazy. So we are coming up on our time, and so we'll just go around and I'll just ask with this podcast if there's one thing you'd like to see us communicate to our listeners or talk about, something that you think is really important. What would that one thing be? And let's start with Tyler.
Well, one thing that we didn't kind of get to talk to is just kind of what's going on in the world of software development for engineering applications right now. And we're in a kind of a unique position here at TechSoft in that we work with almost every single company that's in the CAD, CAM, PLM space that's where 3D data is important to their application. And so we have a pretty interesting view on the trends and what challenges software developers and their end users are facing. So what their end users are driving them to do. There's also just an explosion of new technology. Graphics technology is changing so fast. Developer tools are changing so fast. There's all these different platforms, different browsers. Do you develop native web apps or native apps or web apps? There's all of these big decisions that companies are struggling with right now, and I think that's what we really want to put front and center here in this podcast. Is we know this is a really exciting time to be a software developer. We also know it's a pretty scary time to be a software developer, and that's kind of we're going to be talking about some of these big hairy issues and what certain companies are doing to address these issues and stay successful and how they're making decisions. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, and I think you identified at least 3 topics that could be 3 different episodes for the podcast. So for sure we'll be addressing all those issues. Thank you. Dave, what about you?
Well, I think, if I were to sort of characterize what I see as top of mind out in the marketplace right now, this I think it's related to things that both TJ and Tyler have talked about, that the kind of experience that TJ was describing where people want to be able to just simply take an app that is all that's required to actually do a specific job. This idea that mobile apps, which then have to have a cloud component behind them generally, that is as big a shift as I think I've seen since people started using solid modeling to actually create the design information they need to describe something that's being built, whether it's a ship or a plant or anything of that nature. So this whole area around cloud and mobile is driving a lot of the technology changes that Tyler was describing. And I think that's just a really rich area for us to dig into in coming conversations.
Excellent. Yes, another rich area for more episodes for sure. So thank you. And TJ, you actually have a unique perspective being a writer and then also working with lots of other companies in the manufacturing and the CAD world too. From your perspective, what would you like to see us cover on this podcast?
I think the things you've just mentioned are going to capture attention given the audience I think you're going after. I guess the only thing I might mix in is some hardware that's sort of the eye candy, even though there's a podcast. It's, I think, like a Tango phone, for example, and the sensors they're putting in things, that's clearly going to be bringing 3D data to the table if people are aware that they can do something with it, deeper than just, surface scans that you see.
Right.
So I think there's, like the graphics cards, they're not necessarily always the coolest things to talk about, if you're putting something inside your machine, but I think there's hardware aspects that give you better experiences with 3D data, that you don't necessarily have to talk straight out about 3D data, but you can talk about the tools that are making some of that easier and more, detailed for people who are just walking into the field, not necessarily the engineer or the designer, but people who are, many of the people who are starting to design and invent and create, to Tyler's experience at, with Inventor. I mean, a lot of the people that are using that aren't necessarily engineers anymore.
Right. Okay.
So
that's fair. We can describe the hardware, whether it's a drone or a laser or a phone. We can try and describe that.
Yeah, and I think you put Dave and Tyler out in a field and you hear the drone and them running for cover.
Sound in the background. There you
go. No, go left.
That's awesome. Well, thank you all for your time today. I'm excited to be kicking off this podcast with you all. I think we're going to be covering some really important topics that a lot of people still have questions about, and hopefully our listeners feel the same way and listen in and subscribe. So thank you to all the listeners out there who have joined us on this pilot episode. I encourage you to subscribe on SoundCloud and eventually on iTunes. And please share this podcast with friends, colleagues, and we hope that you will join us in future episodes. So until next time, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on the Beyond 3D podcast, hosted by TechSoft 3D. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and leave us a review, or subscribe on SoundCloud. To listen to past episodes or learn more about TechSoft 3D, visit www.techsoft3d.com/blog. Send us comments and suggestions at info@techsoft3d.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again on the next episode of Beyond 3D.